Hello friends, welcome back to the series where I go through every single book that I've yet to read that I own. In this episode, we're talking about short story collections and nonfiction. The reason I'm combining these two is because sometimes they overlap and I have some nonfiction collections from various authors. And also, I only have like 5 nonfiction books, I think, on my entire TBR. So I just didn't think that needed to be its own entire video. And this is something that's really interesting about these two collections of books. I have a very different relationship with both of them. Short story collections I buy with the intention of just like sitting on them for months or years. Meanwhile, with nonfiction, I buy it with the intention of reading it immediately, which is exactly what I do. So I have about 20 to 25 short story collections and then like 5 nonfiction books, because when I buy nonfiction, I read it right away because I'm usually picking it up because I'm interested in something specific at the moment. With short story collections, I know that I'm always going to have a good time reading a short story collection, so I don't feel like the motivation to immediately pick it up. And also, when I say like enjoy, I mean like 3 or 4 stars. I feel like every anthology that I read is 3 or 4 stars because there's going to be a couple stories that don't work for me, a couple that are my favorites, and so if we average out all the ratings, it's always going to be like a good experience. And like I talked about with thriller and mystery books, I almost always pick these up if they're on sale. Like, I'm not buying these types of books full price because they're not something I really get excited about. They're not something that I anticipate and I want to pick up on their release week. They're something that if I see on sale at the bookstore, at the thrift store, online somewhere, I'm like, well, I might as well pick it up because I'll read it someday. So to divide this up, we're going to start with short story collections from just one singular author. And these are the ones that I feel like I've owned probably the longest, because when I pick up an anthology from a bunch of authors, I'm like, oh, well, there's definitely something, some vibe that I'll enjoy. I'll get introduced to all of these different authors, or I'm reading from some of my favorites. But when it's just one singular author, especially if I haven't read from them before, it's just hard to find the motivation, if I'm being honest. So this one is called The Purple Swamp Hen. It's by Penelope Lively, and it was really just the cover that did it for me. I've never heard of this author before. And now I'm starting to think I might have read the title story and then just didn't continue. Can't really remember, but it says it takes up themes of history, family, and relationships in beautifully rendered settings. I love short stories so much, and I'm sure that this is going to be a good time, but with just like a vague idea like that, when will I ever pick this up? Moving on, this one was sent to me in, well, I paid for this like subscription service where I got books recommended to me, and this is called Get in Trouble by Kelly Link. I again read the first couple stories of this. They didn't do a lot for me, and so I haven't picked it up, but like the future stories in it could be great, so I'll never know until I read them. I remember this one was very strange. It's literary magic. There is no real synopsis, just 700 blurbs. I mean, it's gotten so much praise that you don't need to tell me what any of the stories are about. You're just going to tell me how good the stories are. Then I have Florida by Lauren Groff, which is another cover I absolutely love. I have another Lauren Groff or 2 I've never read from her, but I keep picking up her books. I do believe that these stories are kind of connected. So it says the stories span characters, towns, decades, even centuries, but Florida, its landscape, climate, history, and state of mind become the gravitational center. Again, it's like, but what are the stories about? And then also reviewing short story collections is so hard because I don't know what type of videos to fit them into. When I do wrap-ups, I don't know if I should go through every single story and tell you my rating, and like trying to give you the plot of each one is hard. So I understand why the synopses are often vague, because I myself would have a hard time wrapping them all up in a wrap-up. Anyway, actually I think I picked up this one full price because I was interested in it. It's called If I Had Two Wings. This is by Randall Keenan. I've heard great things about this author, and it says it's set in the fictional territory of Timms Creek, North Carolina. The stories are humorous, seasoned by inventiveness and maturity. It's about unstoppable loves, unexpected salvations, and eerie persistence of history. Of all the short story collections by a singular author, this one is at the top of my list. This is called Friday Black. It is by Nana Kwame Ajay Brenya. I had this on my TBR for a while before finding a copy, and it says it confronts readers with a complicated, insistent, wrenching chorus of emotions, the final note of which remarkably is hope. And they're all about placing ordinary characters in extraordinary situations. Then I have Difficult Women by Roxane Gay. I've liked every Roxane Gay I've read, but I think they've all been nonfiction, and this is just about women in general. Women living in privilege, women living in poverty, strippers to engineers. It's about passionate love and human connection. I also have Stripped to the Bone by Ghada Alatrash, which is portraits of Syrian women. They are fictional stories, but are very much informed by the reality of Syrian women. Then I have A House is a Body by Shruti Swami. And this says they're all stories written with the edge and precision of a knife blade. Set in the United States and India, they reveal small but intense moments of beauty, pain, and power that contain the world. This is The Devil You Know by Jen Farrell. I picked this up when I was on a trip from one of the most beautiful thrift stores I've ever been in, and it just says, these stories deal with sex, love, work, birth, and death in alternately moving, shocking, funny, and at times devastating ways. No wonder I haven't prioritized it when I don't really know like what I'm gonna get from it. And then I have In the Meantime by Paul Tremblay, which I've had for such a long time. I think I found this one on Thrift Books. I think the cover is very interesting. One of the stories is called The Two-Headed Girl, so I'm assuming these are all horror. It features 15 stories of fear and paranoia, stories of apocalypses, both societal and personal, and stories of longing and coping. That sounds like something that I would love. This is Dreadful Young Ladies and Other Stories by Kelly Barnhill. And I'm in love with this cover. I think it's beautiful. I've heard it's a great collection. There was just a bug and I thought it was real. These I think are also going to be like an ominous horror fantasy situation. I really like when synopses are written like this, where it calls out some specific stories but not all of them. So it'll say like, in notes of the untimely death of Riona Blake, a witch is haunted by the deadly repercussions of a spell. The Insect and the Astronomer appends expectations about good and bad, knowledge and ignorance. In The Unlicensed Magician, it introduces the secret magical life of Invisible Girl, once left for dead. So it like gives you a little bit of the plot of a couple of the stories. I'm very much intrigued by this. So I kind of want to save it for fall. I feel like I don't do that for a lot of genres, but when it comes to short story collections, I feel like there is a right season and moment for each of them. Someone said something recently about wine and compared it to books. I think it was Ariel, but I think it was a quote from someone else. She said like when people go wine shopping and they're building a wine collection, they're not doing it with the intent of drinking all of the wine within the next couple weeks. It's about purchasing the right wine, knowing that on any occasion you have the right wine to drink that day with that meal. And that's how I'm choosing to look at books, and especially short story collections. I feel like there's a right moment for each of them. Eventually they will all fit into a specific video or feel right seasonally. Next up, let's move on to collaborative work. So I have some YA ones, and these ones I think I really need your help in like, should I keep them? Are they going to be worth my time? This one I'm definitely going to read eventually because it's all queer authors. It's part of an anthology series, and this one is 17 short stories, all modern day like current stories, but they're involving a lot of different things, from vampires to aliens. And we have authors that I have never heard of and then authors that I'm familiar with and I've read short stories from before, like Meredith Russo and Julian Winters, Sandra Mitchell, Candace Montgomery. That one is staying for sure. But then this one was definitely like a cover, a title by Eat the Sky, Drink the Ocean. It says it's stories of imagination and daring. I have never read from any of these authors, not a single one of them. So this would be a good time to introduce myself to all of their writing. This one is all imagination. So we've got a Little Red Riding Hood retelling. We have MasterChef contestants going time traveling. We go to outer space. We have a pirate ship. It says it will inspire readers to open their minds and take a fresh look at the world we know. This one is called It's a Whole Spiel. Love, latkes, and Other Jewish Stories. I've read from many of these authors before. Dahlia Adler, Adil Said, Hannah Moskowitz, Nova Rensuma, but then a few people I haven't heard of. And this says it's all short stories about Jewish teens, from a story at summer camp, someone taking the trip of a lifetime. It says from stories of confronting their relationships with Judaism to rom-coms with a side of bagels and lox. It's a Whole Spiel is an insightful and funny Jewish anthology from a collection of diverse Jewish authors. And then I have this one, which I've had for a long time, called Fresh Ink. This one is just like so short that it worries me with how short each individual story must be. But this one features Walter Dean Myers, Melinda Lowe, Jason Reynolds, Amina May Safi, Nicola Yoon, and then a bunch of authors that I haven't read from before. This is from the collective We Need Diverse Books, and it says there are 12 stories with endings that are still being written. It will inspire you to break conventions, bend the rules, and color outside the lines. And then all of these ones are like adult anthologies. So the first two are the Book of Magic and the Book of Swords, which I feel like people think that I won't like because it's been so long now since I read Dangerous Women and Rogues, which are also anthologies edited by George R. R. Martin and Gardner Dozois. But I am so down for stories about royalty and high fantasy and like all of this wild stuff that I wouldn't typically pick up a full novel of, but I really enjoy short stories in any genre covering any topic. I just think it's so fun to dip into this world for just like 50 pages. So this one is all about magic. This one is all about epic fantasy journeys. Then I have one that doesn't really need an explanation as far as topic. It's called Sex and Death, so you know what it's about. And these are all provocative stories about encountering these things in your life. Sometimes traumatic, sometimes hilarious. Next up I have Echoes, which is the biggest one, but it's probably at the top of my list of ones I want to read because they're all ghost stories. Some of my favorite authors are in here. We've got Seanan McGuire, Paul Tremblay, Stephen Graham Jones, but then so many people I've never read from before, and this could introduce me to so many other novels. Then I have another scary one. It's called After Sundown, and it's all horror stories. In this one we have Grady Hendrix and Katrina Ward, and again a whole list of authors I've never heard of. This one is another scary one. It's called Dark Cities, Masterpieces of Urban Terror. Again, in here we've got Seanan McGuire, as well as Tananarive Due. Never read a short story from her. Paul Tremblay again, and so many people I don't know. So naturally all the horror ones are at the top of my list, but I also want to wait for the horror season. It's tough sometimes because I feel like short stories don't leave a really large impact. They're not super memorable for me. I can read a short story and then read a full novel a couple months later that was based off that short story, and people will comment and be like, yeah, this is from the anthology you read that like pitched this book, and I'm like, it was? I don't remember that story at all. Next up is also like I think a scary kind of one. It's called Flight or Fright, and it says it's 17 Turbulent Tales, edited by Stephen King and Beth Vincent. Not sure if he has a story in here though. Oh yeah, there's a new story by Joe Hill and Stephen King in here. We also have stories from Ray Bradbury, Roald Dahl, a bunch of authors I've never heard of. So this is one that the stories weren't specifically written like for this anthology, but it's curated short stories. Perfect for airport and airplane reading. And then another one at the top of my list is called Loosed Upon the World. This is climate fiction. Again, we've got Seanan McGuire here. It's not that I picked them all up just because of her, but I think I learned about many of these because of her. And I haven't read from any of these other authors, but they're all like speculative stories about our future. Now moving into nonfiction, I have one that is a collaborative book as well. It's called Our Stories, Our Voices, and it's 21 YA authors getting real about injustice, empowerment, and growing up female in America. Sona Charapatra, Brandy Colbert, Nina LaCour, Anna Marie McLemore, all lending their voices to this, as well as a bunch of authors I've never read. And then this one is called We Crossed a Bridge and It Trembled, and it is also voices from Syria, but this is nonfiction. It's by Wendy Perlman, and it's a collection of stories, poems, and testimonies based on interviews with hundreds of Syrians across 5 years and 3 continents. So it looks like this with short moments. I guess you could say it's from a collection of people, but it's compiled and organized by this author. Then I have a memoir called We Have Always Been Here by Samra Habib. This is a queer Muslim memoir, and it's about her life growing up in Pakistan and moving to Canada as a queer woman. This one is Call Me Indian by Fred Sasakamoose, and this was actually sent to me by Indigo as one of their best books of the year last year, and this is about this man's experience with the horrors of residential schools and then becoming the first Indigenous player in the NHL with treaty status. Next up I have The Inconvenient Indian, which I've had for so long and it needs to The amount of Thomas King that I have in my collection is probably more than any other author, and this is, as it says, a curious account of Native people in North America. I've heard nothing but good things about this, so it's at the top of the list. I also have A Long Way Gone, Memoirs of a Boy Soldier by Ishmael Bia. And this says at age 12 he fled attacking rebels in Sierra Leone, was picked up by the government army. It's his story of being removed from fighting by UNICEF and learning to forgive himself from the truly terrible acts he didn't think he was capable of. So that's it. The 30-ish short story, anthology, nonfiction, or a combination of all of those things, items that I have on my TBR shelf and I would like to read. If you've read some and you think that they would be amazing for me, I would love to hear about it. If there's something you think I could probably ditch from this pile that won't do a lot for me, I'd love to hear that as well. I really enjoyed getting to go through all of these because I don't think about my short story collections a lot. I just look at them as just one big stack and they all blend together. But it's good to remember who's in each one and which ones are kind of calling to me now. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next Wednesday with another edition.